So we want to go back. We're going to come back to All Too Well, but I want to begin with you as a songwriter, because one of the things you're best known for are your lyrics. You're a songwriter, and your lyrics are memorized, right?
Yes.
They are studied by scholars.
Oh my God.
Yes, yeah. And I wonder, in your initial development as a songwriter coming up, how much of the process for you was visual?
It was always part of the process, because when I would write a song, I would immediately start thinking of how do I want to present this on stage? If I made a music video for this, what would it look like? And then when I would create an album, partially through or halfway through, I would start conceptualizing, what does this album look like? What are the colors we're dealing with here? What are the themes? What are the aesthetics? Like, what do I want this to symbolize? Because I, from a very early point in my career, wanted to establish each album as its own era of sorts. And I think that it's really something that I can only thank the fans for, that, you can't really do things like that if people don't care and pay attention to it. So it was always a part of the process, establishing the visuals. And early on, when we would make music videos, the process was, I'm 16, I'd reach out to a video director and I'd say, hey, I think it would be cool if the concept was that we were like, I'm in love with my best friend in high school, and he lives across the street, and but there's this cheerleader who's dating, and there's a football game, and there's like a dance, and there's these signs. Like, you come up with concepts.
Okay.
And over time, I started to take on more and more responsibility, and the more responsibility I took on creatively, the happier I was. Right. So here we are.
And here you are as a director. And what has your path through movies been? What films did you love growing up, and what images from movies still stay with you as a musician?
I think that it has fluctuated over time. I've always really loved certain films during certain phases I was in musically. Like, I made an album called 1989. Thank you for listening to it. And I would watch John Hughes movies. I just watched 16 Candles and Breakfast Club all the time, just over and over. Thanks. And then, this would happen throughout my career for different things, but I remember the pandemic hit, and I was watching I remember watching 2 back-to-back Guillermo del Toro movies, Devil's Backbone and then Pan's Labyrinth.
Nice.
So my whole world turned into folk tales and forests and mythical creatures, and I was just so dazzled by those films. And I'd always, obviously, like, Shape of Water is one of my favorite films ever, but I hadn't seen those 2 very pinnacle films in his repertoire. And then I watched Rear Window, which I hadn't seen, which is embarrassing, but I hadn't seen it at that point, and it was very voyeuristic. It was very much like, he's watching his neighbors, and like, he sees a murder. I haven't experienced that, but I did experience combining some of those cinematic inspirations and films that I loved with, like, okay, so you end up with an album that is me telling stories from other people's perspectives in a very folk tale kind of...
a mix of Rear Window and Del Toro's movies in a way.
If I had to assign, the culprits cinematically, I would say it would be those 3 films.
Interesting. Okay.
Oh, and then the next record, I was just non-stop watching Sense and Sensibility, the Ang Lee one, the Kate Winslet, just everything. And that was for an album called Evermore. It's just, I have very specific film memories for things. But with this one, I think my obsession with, there's this, I don't know if it's actually something people talk about, but in my mind, there's this period of time in the 70s where you started seeing these romantic films where these 2 characters are so beautifully, intimately woven together, and then they just unravel the braid right in front of you, and you just can't believe it. Like The Way We Were and Love Story, Kramer versus Kramer.
Yeah, I'm just going to mention that one.
Yeah, it's just
amazing in that film.
Yeah, and so those ones were ones that I think, because I love those films, just hitting those emotional touchstones that those films just punch me in the stomach and hit. And then I think in terms of modern films that I loved that probably lended themselves to making this film, I would say Marriage Story, really upsetting for months. I was not all right. And The Souvenir Part 1 and 2.
Oh yes, Joanna
Hogg's films.
Yeah.
I just absolutely love that she. I had actually made the short film by the time I went and saw The Souvenir Part 2, and the fact that it's about this young woman who experiences this extreme heartbreak and despair and then makes something. It's just like.
Speaking to you.
It's exactly what I want to see in a film. So.
You mentioned the 70s. I heard that you also like John Cassavetes'
Yes,
films.
yes,
from the
yes,
70s.
yes.
Also big heartbreak, big emotion.
Yeah, and I just think I don't know, I just really love how he allows despair and human emotion to just play out.
Yeah.
It just is allowed to breathe and play itself out.
You see the loose ends.
Yes.
Right? It's not tied up.
You feel like you're really in that house with that
Yeah.
fight going on, and it's just harrowing.
Yes. Well, the fight that you crafted here also feels that way, and I love how the music stops and you really begin to see their relationship kind of disintegrate.
Yeah.
And then come back together a little bit, but it feels like it draws on some of that same kind of spirit from those 70s movies.
Such a nice thing for you to say to me. I think you can tell a lot about people based on how they fight or argue. And I think with this film, I went into it having scripted out a few different scenes and knowing that I wanted to show one of them in depth and at length. And when it came time to shoot, you know, we filmed them breaking up. We filmed them falling in love, some of the dialogue with that. But I kind of, as we got closer to it, I was like, it's gonna be the fight. It's gonna, I think that we had scripted it out, but I had talked to Dylan and Sadie so much about what their intentions were and who and what exactly it is that's the catalyst for this fight and why it's not about him just dropping her hand. It's about this entire just molecular structure where she feels out of place and he feels unequipped to handle that, and it all comes back to being in different places in their lives, having this huge gap of age difference between them. She's still got 1 foot in girlhood, 1 foot in this very adult world. His life is very cultivated. I just felt like we had talked so much about it, that I was dealing with such emotionally intelligent actors, and we talked so much about this that when we actually shot, it ended up being like, I think probably 92% of that scene is a oneer.
Really?
Yeah, we don't cut till the very end until he says, "Why don't look at me like that?"
Yeah.
That's the first time we cut. And we were just, my producer Saul and I were just at the monitors, just like there was like a death clutch as we're watching this, because we're like, oh my God, like we're injuring each other's arms at this point, like, but also trying not to make a sound, because we're just so in awe of how much we could trust these actors with every single bit of the scene, the story, the weight.
So much is in the writing, I think, as well, your writing, because
Aww.
you really, serious.
Thanks.
You know, for me, when I was watching, I've seen this short film many times now, and what I really got from it is that she does not feel seen in that relationship, and she's trying to tell him about an instance where she did not feel seen in the company of his friends, and he's not really getting it.
Yeah.
You know, and that's such a powerful moment because they're so intimate and yet so far apart.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that's a really amazing takeaway, because I've always been very fascinated, and one of the reasons I wanted to make a short film and not a music video for this song is because I've been fascinated with the dynamic of the age of the character that Sadie's playing, and what a precarious age that is when you could fit back at your family home, sort of, but you sort of don't. You could fit in an adult's cultivated apartment where they have like a French press and they have all the things that adults have, but you kind of don't. So you kind of fit everywhere, but you kind of fit nowhere. And I think that plays into a little bit of where she's coming from. And I have to credit Dylan too with the fact that I know that he's gaslighting her, and I know that he's like, I know it's problematic, but I'm watching that and I'm like, he is so charismatic. He is charismatic, problematic, and I am still sort of rooting for them to work through this because he makes some charming points, and he does it in a really, really, like, I don't know, just the way that they both played it, I was just blown away.
It's beautiful, because I'm sure so many people relate to it as well, because charismatic, problematic, definition of a boyfriend, maybe?
An ex-boyfriend.
An ex-boyfriend. I don't know how far we want to go with that, but...
Zero.
Zero.
Nowhere.
You mentioned music videos, and I do want to go back, because before you directed this film, you began to have increasing visual input into the making of your music videos. And I want to ask about that process, how you were drawn to getting into the creativity of the music videos as opposed to just being on camera. The collaborators, you've worked with a couple of directors quite a lot.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm just curious to know what that process was like for you to get more and more creative input and control